This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon. Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rural Woman Podcast. Today you'll meet Kristine Beck. Kristine is a dairy and cash crop farmer in the Pontiac County located in Western Quebec. There, she and her husband, Robbie, operate Beck Family Farm with an awesome team of people comprised of both family and non-family members. Currently, the farm is in the midst of converting from a parlour milking system to robotic milking, and they hope to continue to expand their operation and continuously improve productivity. Kristine has a B.Comm in finance and international management from U Ottawa. She was not raised on a farm and married into the industry in 2000, and once she got a taste of it, she was hooked. A girl after my own heart. I am so excited for you to hear Kristine's story and to get inspired. Before we get to Kristine's interview, I want to say a hello and a big thank you to the OGs on Patreon who have been with us supporting the Rural Woman Podcast since 2019. Annabelle M., Kylie W., Amanda G., and Tiffany P. These fine folks have been here since the beginning, and they have supported me through the do-it-yourself audio editing, the cheesy graphics that I came up with, and the Thursday all-nighters to make sure an episode was ready for your earbuds every Friday morning. We have grown into what we are today, and that is all thanks to your support and the support of all the other patrons over on Patreon. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. To learn more about how you can support the stories of women in agriculture through the Rural Woman Podcast, head on over to patreon.com/the Rural Woman Podcast or the link in today's show notes. Without further ado, my friends, let's get to this week's episode with Kristine. Kristine, welcome to the Rural Woman Podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks very much for having me.
I am so excited to have you on the show. If I'm being honest, before we hit record, we could have just been fangirling about the incredible young woman who has put your name forward to come on the podcast. So before we start, we have to say a special hello to McKenna.
Yes, we do. McKenna is a very, very sweet girl and she's graduating at McDonald College this year and has been with us on our team for several years. So very, very happy to have her on our team and very honored and flattered that she put my name forward. And I'd say humbled at the same time.
Right. I would take it as a humbling experience to have an employee of yours put your name forward. So obviously you're doing something right over at Beck Family Farms to have such a kind staff member put your name forward. So, hi, McKenna. So, for the folks who are unfamiliar with you, Kristine, give us your background. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and how you got your start in agriculture.
Well, I'm from Clarendon, Quebec. So I grew up just 10 minutes down the road here and from the Pontiac County. So we're about an hour from Ottawa, but on the Quebec side in Western Quebec. And I'm a dairy and cash crop farmer in cahoots with my husband. So he's my business partner, life partner, co-parent, of course. And I got my start in farming. I married into agriculture. So he's a fourth generation farmer, but I grew up with self-employed parents in a small town. But I got my start marrying into the industry.
Amazing. So, when you're sharing your story of how you got into agriculture and locationally to where you grew up to where you are now, I feel like I am looking in a mirror. Very similar to you, did not grow up in agriculture, but our farm is about 20 minutes from the front door of my family home of where I grew up. I'm always curious to ask the first generation farmers who came into agriculture this way. What was your knowledge of agriculture and farming growing up? Did you know where your food came from, or was this a whole new experience for you?
Well, I would say somewhat. Like I grew up in a rural town, and growing up through high school, I mean, I had lots of friends that had farming backgrounds or were on farms. I remember as a young child, going to one of my friends' beef farms. They were cow calf operators, and so kind of I would say glimpses. So I had knowledge of where my food came from, but really not the magnitude behind the agriculture industry, everything that goes into it, how deep it is. And I actually recently did a talk, and there was a picture of a girl that I put in my presentation, like a little girl wearing a dress, and she's feeding, chickens and all this. And I dreamt that I would be her. Like I wanted to be her growing up. I wanted chickens and cows and horses, and I kind of drove my parents crazy. And I used to think to myself, it was kind of like unfair that I really wanted to be on the farm, like some of these friends of mine, but I lived in town. And so it's just kind of funny. It worked out that way, and here I am.
Absolutely, the full circle. Well, it's not often the women that I get to interview that I've actually been to the area of where they farm or where they grew up. But a few summers ago, I was lucky enough to visit now friends of mine in the Pontiac area at Laystone Farms. The area in which you live is absolutely stunning, and you are surrounded, like you said, in the rural communities by agriculture, and maybe a little bit different agriculture than I'm used to here in southern Alberta. So can you kind of describe the climate and where you live and where you grow now?
It's a very humid, I would say warmer, well, it's getting warmer all the time, warm climate. We grow corn and beans, and we farm approximately 1,700 acres, which by Western standards would definitely not be very large. But that includes our hay, and we have a little bit of a pasture for our dry cows, the 19 acres that our dry cows have access to when they're kind of on their dry period and their break. And so, yeah, we grow a lot of alfalfa, hay, corn, beans, and it is kind of a long summer, muggy climate type of environment.
Tell us about your life prior to 2000 and prior to getting into agriculture. What was your career? What were you doing?
So my career path, I was line of business people. And I decided that I was going off to the University of Ottawa, and I was taking a Bachelor of Commerce degree in finance and international management. My plan was actually to go to Bay Street and to work in commodities or stock trading and kind of get involved in the financial market from that angle, because that was very interesting to me. So that is definitely not the path I ended up on. So my husband is actually the older brother of one of my good friends. So that's how all that worked out. And I was actually leaving for an exchange. I had been accepted to go to Lund University in Sweden to finish the international management portion of my degree. And we had not been dating very long. And he said, well, I don't know if you should go. So I was kind of curious about that. So he thought that I should stay back and we should plan to get married. And I picked a very different adventure. So I don't know, he can talk me into stuff that nobody else can. I was pretty determined I was going. I was accepted in the program, but I did. I opted out, and a very different adventure. So it was it's been neat. I have used every iota of my degree throughout my career on and off farm. And it's been a really interesting compliment. So that was the path I was on. And then in 2000, we were married, and that started my on farm, I would say, experience. But I still worked off farm at that point.
And what were you doing off farm?
So in 2000, I started working at RBC, so fresh out of school. So I graduated my bachelor's degree in April of 2000. And then we were married in August of 2000. And so first I worked for a community investment corporation in local economic development. And then I was there for a short period of time and went into RBC. And so that's where I had my two children and my two mat leaves. And it worked out. I was a personal banker, and I got my first introduction into agriculture. I really wanted to work on the ag banking desk. It was very interesting to me. And I went back from my first maternity leave already expecting my second child. So, that was kind of, and I appreciate it. It was a human resources challenge for them. And they handled it very well. Very fortunate throughout my career. I worked for companies that I really learned a lot from and really enjoyed the experience. And RBC, they handled it just beautifully. So, I wasn't really going to take all my customers back to be back for 7 months or 8 months and then go off on leave again. That's really not fair to your clients. And it just worked out that the ag banking desk needed a little bit of assistance. The person that was in it was away for a period of time. So I said, well, I can read a financial statement and I know about farming, and this is short term. What have you got to lose? If you put me in, I don't even want more pay. Like, just leave everything where it is. Just let me try it on. And they said, okay. And so off I went. And so when I came back from my mat leave, I returned to that role permanently. And I stayed there until we actually moved out to Western Canada for several years.
Well, and you had mentioned that your university degree plus your off-farm job really bodes well for being a farming business and to be an entrepreneur in agriculture. Hey, small business owners, are you feeling overwhelmed by the countless ways to advertise your brand online? Me too. A powerful tool that you might be overlooking: Pinterest. Did you know that Pinterest is the third largest search engine right behind Google and YouTube? With 500 million people using Pinterest every month, it's a goldmine for small business owners like us. Whether you're looking to drive more traffic to your website, grow your email list, or increase product sales, Pinterest can help you achieve your goals. Shireen from Pinning by Bad Gringa is an experienced Pinterest strategist and an avid woman in agriculture who is passionate about helping small business owners like us unlock the full potential of Pinterest. Pinterest is a visual discovery engine. It's perfect for showcasing your products and driving targeted traffic to your website, and Shireen is here to guide you every step of the way. With Shireen's expertise, you'll learn how to create effective Pinterest strategies tailored to your business needs, from increasing website traffic to growing your email list and boosting sales. Don't miss out on the opportunity to transform your marketing strategy with Pinterest. Visit the link in today's show notes and start leveraging the power of Pinterest to grow your business. Pinning by Bad Gringa, helping women in agriculture and small business owners succeed with Pinterest. So what do you think are some of, I always try and pose this question as a person who also didn't grow up in farming. So we grew up, off of the farm. So we have different lived experiences than coming on the farm. Between your city roots or your off-farm roots and your education and experience for farming, what are the biggest benefits that you think you've been able to bring to your farming operation with all of those different hats?
I think that what it brought was that I just don't necessarily look at it from the same angle as maybe my husband would, because it's just from a fresh set of lenses. So, I'll ask questions, or, and certainly in the past, I think we're probably a little bit more, it feels like we share more of a brain now that it's 25 years down the road. Even still, it'll be like, well, why don't we look at it this way? Why couldn't we do something like this? Why couldn't we integrate, from a human resources standpoint? I think just challenging the status quo, or how it would just be assumed that it might be done, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I just think, as like you said, the fresh set of eyes coming from agriculture, I think is an absolutely pivotal piece of information that we can bring, and really kind of the secret sauce of bringing the fresh set of eyes in. So, Kristine, when was it that you transitioned from your off-farm careers to being a full-time hands-on farmer on the farm?
So, yeah, there's a bit of a lead up to that. And I discussed it with my husband because I think it's important to really explain the whole journey. So, it was always on our mind. It was always something we wanted to do, to farm full time together. And so we went out to Western Canada because we started a farm transition like many years ago that, maybe didn't quite go the way that we had hoped. And we just kind of needed a fresh start. And so moved out west to Peace River for about 3.5 years. And out there, I worked for Cargill, and I worked on the Ag Horizon division, so buying grain and selling crop inputs. And he worked on a grain farm and in transport. So we stayed there for about 3.5 years, and his grandfather passed away. So that left a vacant farm. And his dad said, there's a farmer out there with no farm, and there's a farm here with no one to farm it. Why don't you come home? So it was a big discussion because it was obviously a huge commitment to go home and to give up what we had established out west and to say, okay, we're going to start dairy farming. And so we went, and the barn had been empty for probably about 3 years. It hadn't been a dairy barn for over 20 years. And the house had been empty for several years. And so we started our own dairy farm with 24 first calf heifers. And we said, okay, here we go. So we did that. And having a financial background, I knew looking at the financial statements, I said, there's no way this can work with the two of us being at home. I have to work. And it looks like it's going to be about 6 to 7 years. That's what the projection said. 6 to 7 years, I will work off farm and support the family cost of living. And you will have to work, and every cent will have to be rolled back in to the farm to get this thing going. So we knew what we were getting into, and so we did it. But 7 years down the road of starting a farm with 24 cows and 100 acres, to by the time we had 100 head of livestock, 6.5 to 7 years later, and close to 500 tillable acres, like that required, like I would get home from my job and I would milk cows and I would do the books, and I had, young kids and ran to minor hockey, and my daughter competed in equestrian, and they were both in 4-H, and I was on the school committees. So after 6 or 7 years of that, to be truthful, I just couldn't do it anymore. So I actually had a little bit of a mental health crisis. I had a burnout. So I didn't even believe in that word. I had no idea. I thought, people are just tired. You just need to rest a little bit. But it was really like I got hit with a baseball bat over the head. I was off work for an entire summer, for 10 weeks. And we had to make a decision. I said, I can't do this anymore. I couldn't do it. I couldn't work full time. And I did a lot of business travel for about 10 years of my life. So I just couldn't do that, keep up the personal commitments, keep up the farming commitments. I said, either the cows have to go and we just cash crop and I continue to work off farm. Like we're really at a crossroads and we had to make a choice. Or I give up my job and there are more cows, but we had to pick. So after discussing it, since we had always wanted to farm together and run a business together, we decided it was very scary. We would do more cows. But I was very well supported, and I worked for Farm Credit Canada at the time. And again, like all three, I was so fortunate. I've had amazing leaders in my life. I've been exposed to a lot of fantastic people in the workplace, and they were so supportive. They said, you know what? Why don't you go and try it? Take a year without pay, take a sabbatical. And if you want to leave after, go ahead. But if you want to come back, you can. So it was kind of nice because I had a chance to try it on with a little bit of a safety net. So I left my job. And so that was in the winter. And after 5 months, I knew that I wasn't going back. So I called and I said, you know what, I'm not going to come back. And then everybody can just line their ducks up properly and staff accordingly. So we said, okay, this is what we're going to do. So we were right at the point where we were going to take out a whole other division of the barn to put in more stalls and extend our barn, because we had 40 cows in a tie stall barn at the time, and we had maxed out the footprint of that barn. And so we were going to put some more cows or more stalls in to be able to grow our herd. At that very same time, his dad and mom, who ran a dairy farm down the road, but a larger free stall with 150 stalls, they said that they wanted to retire and, would we be willing in purchasing their farm rather than expand our own? And so Robbie and I have been masters of like about every 5 years, we just stick a dynamite in our lives, blow it up and kind of restart. So our journey to where we are now was like a lot of, I would say, restarts, reboots every couple of years. And so we said, yeah. So we made the business plan for that. And it was approximately a year and a half to 2 years from the time we had the discussions to the time we planned everything. So we, sold our quota holdings at one place and packed up our herd, brought our cows with us and moved over there. So now we're in the free stall with 150 stalls. And now we're putting in the robots. So that was kind of what led me to where we were going to farm full time together.
Kristine, that is a journey. And the stick of dynamite reference is probably pretty accurate. Those are a lot of big changes in the last 24 years.
It's really this cycle of every 4 or 5 years. Every time we're like, oh, this is really comfy. How can we take this like a little dollhouse and shake it and set it back on its foundation?
Absolutely. Well, and thank you for sharing all of the ups and downs along the way with us. You are not alone in having the feeling of burnout. And for me, it's very similar. I call it my existential crisis, my come to Jesus moment of really like, what am I going to do? And what is going to bring me closer to my goals and, to live a fulfilling life? And to be able to do that on a family farm with your partner, with your spouse, with your husband, and continue to grow your farm is an incredible opportunity for you. And I'm so glad that you were able to take that time for yourself to really evaluate of what was important to you and how you wanted to shape what the next chapter was going to look like. So you mentioned that you are in the process and you've started switching over to robotics, which as a non-dairy farmer, I think is absolutely incredible. And recently I was just at a farm show and I was looking at the robotic features that are now available in the forever changing world of technology and agriculture. So take us through what that transition has been like for you guys and what led you to wanting to go down the robotics route.
Well, that's a good question. So we're not there, like we're still in the construction phase. So the cows are still going through the parlor and we're kind of have our barn half tore up on one side and we have one robot room ready. But if I go to the beginning of what led us to that, so as we made the transition, so 2019 is when we moved to the freestall that we're at now. And it was originally built. So my in-laws built that in 2008. They built that while we were out west. And they moved into that barn then. So we moved in 2019. And, it's just kind of like anything else. The infrastructure was starting to age. And, as you start thinking about scalability and what your goals are and what your growth goals are, and how can we add animal units and still be effective, and how can we increase production, with the footprint that we have in the interim, that would say, well, we'll, probably have to think about milking 3 times a day. So then what does staffing look like? And, we have a front exit parlor. So there were a lot of different considerations about increasing efficiency and looking at the infrastructure that we currently had. So then we decided, and we knew that the technology that we could get out of it was, dated. So we wanted to be able to have more tracking, more data on the cows, on production. So a little bit more streamlining. So we did a huge list of pros and cons because we weren't necessarily sold initially on going like for sure with robotics. So we wanted to consider, would we replace it with a parlor? Would we go robotics? We weren't really sure. So we did the whole list of pros and cons. And I guess where the tipping point really was for us was that we had to upgrade and change our bulk tank. And so when the supplier came, the owner of the company came, and they also sell Lely robots. And so we talked about whether we would change for a parlor or a robot and had the conversation with him. And then he explained to us some of the construction work that we would have to do to the front of the barn. And we realized we would have to take down a portion and rebuild the entire parlor front of the barn, which would probably make the project be like 50% more cost than it would be to retrofit our barn and to put 3 robots in. And then we started to think of, well, if we wanted to start milking the cows 3 times a day, that's an increased staffing challenge. So rather than have to go down the path of looking at how we were going to staff it, and also the increased construction costs, we thought, no, I think it's just time. The fit for us and where we wanted to go with the herd led us to choosing to put in the robots.
I love asking this question or thinking about this in the beginning stages, because you are kind of, again, going through the dynamite phase of changing everything of how your operation can look in the future. What have been, some of the challenges that you face bringing in this new technology into your operation, and what have been some of the rewarding outcomes that have happened so far?
Well, I think that challenging definitely has been because there's a lack of resources out there. Like, really, there's 3 guys on the farm right now. So my husband and Nick and Josh, and really the 3 of them are doing all of the work because there just are not a lot of people around. Like, even the contractor that we originally spoke to said, I just don't have anybody to put on this job. And so my husband said, well, I guess we're just going to have to do it ourselves. Sure, he is very much and he would hate me saying this. He would blush, but he really can. He can tackle, he can build anything, put anything together. So he was just like, okay, well, I guess we're just going to have to do this. So they have been pouring the concrete, jackhammering everything out, putting in the posts. They've been doing it all, getting all of that ready up until, of course, the technicians will have to come in, the lay technicians, and put the rest of the robots together. So that has definitely been a challenge, dealing with some of the criteria that we have to make sure that we are aligned to, because we're doing it on our own. And so we have to make sure that we're meeting all of those standards. So that's been a challenge. And some of the rewards, I would say, is definitely, it's been hilarious to watch the cattle. We definitely had expectations that we would be disturbing them more. We are like their entertainment every day. The cows, they fired up an excavator with a jackhammer attachment on it. And they started it. And there was one cow that's 5 stalls over, and she's chewing her cud looking at us like, do you mind? Yeah, so that's been kind of that part has been rewarding and pretty hilarious. Too. So I'm going to be anxious because we're really not into the meat of it yet, where we're training the cows and seeing what the outcome is. We're just really still we kind of don't know what we don't know, if that makes sense.
I think that's the most exciting part, almost, of starting anything new, of the part where you don't know what you don't know, so you don't know what to expect, and you kind of get to just learn and grow along the way. Some people might see it as a failure. I think of it as a learning opportunity for the things that don't necessarily go your way in the beginning.
Agreed. And I've been able to connect with some pretty fantastic people. And they've been so kind in taking their time to show us their barns and to say, you know what, it's okay if you feel this way whenever you get there. Or I've had a lot of comments about, when you get to week 3 of training these cows, because training is going to involve people being there 24 hours a day, helping these cows get through until they're trained and understand. So there will be 24-hour-a-day people at the barn getting these cows adjusted to going through the robots. And I've had a lot of people say, don't worry, week 3, you're going to wish you never did it. And then all of a sudden it gets so much better. So it's been really fantastic to make a little bit of a, I would say, support network. And so that's been really cool to meet and connect with these people.
Absolutely. So neat. Kristine, I want to kind of go back a little bit in the story. I think one of the biggest, hottest topics in agriculture, that might be one of the biggest elephants in any room, is farm transition. And, making those plans for yourself or for your children can be a very stressful thing. And I know coming with the husband being multi-generational and coming from you as a first generation and then raising the next generation on the farm. Talk to us about some of the challenges that you have faced when it comes to transition planning for not only yourself and your partner, but maybe thinking about the future and your kids when it comes to transition.
Yeah, well, we definitely did not have a classic. I don't know if there is a classic farm transfer. I think there's the idyllic picture of what everybody thinks a farm transfer is going to be, but we're all human beings. And so like it can't be perfect because we're imperfect people. So because Robbie and I, our entire lives has been this bizarre dynamic roller coaster, it'll be interesting to see how the next generation goes. Because the first time through, like when we were married and he farmed with his parents, like I don't know, for a variety of reasons that just didn't work. I wonder if they were too young in the sense that there was just not enough room for Robbie to take like a part yet, or were his expectations too high about what his role was going to be? I don't know. But for whatever reason, that didn't jive. And that was okay. Like we had to learn to be okay with that and go do our own thing. And they worked exceptionally well together. And his parents were so supportive of us when we started up our own farm. And then each of them had their own business to run, but they worked like symbiotically. Like they would do hay together, or they would, I don't know, they did lots of different things together. But at the end of the day, each of them went home to run their own farms. And that worked very well. And so our farm transfer was really like a farm purchase. Like by the time we did a farm transfer in 2019, like I don't know, how old was I? Like by then I was 42. And so Robbie would have been 46 or something like that. Yeah, that's right. Like 42 and 46. So by the time we did that, it really wasn't a transfer as much as a purchase, right? They wanted to retire and be done decision making. And we just came in and we'd already been running our own operation for like a number of years. And so that was a very different transition. So it'll be interesting now for the next one. So we do have two university age children who are just so awesome. They have come along for the ride. They just thought that their whole little life was normal and they were so good. They just did whatever. We're so flexible. I'm so blessed. So our oldest son is finishing his degree this year at Laurentian University. And he's not a farmer. He's very happy to help us and work diligently when he's at home, and he knows there's stuff that has to be done. And, he knows there's chores, or he knows there's a tractor to drive, and, he's not doing his own thing. He's very happy to help us. But he told us years ago, that's not where my heart is. And his dad and I, like we have always followed our passion and our heart. And we told our kids, you have to do the same. We have farmed because we wanted to farm, and you must do what God has put in your heart to do. So you have to follow that. So he is graduating with a degree in sports administration this year. So he will be the off-farm sibling. And our daughter is at the University of Guelph studying a Bachelor of Science degree in agriculture. She's in her second year. And so she is looking to come home and would like to be part of the farm business. But we still don't even know what that looks like, because she's debating or questioning whether she would like to still work off farm for a couple of years to gain experience, I guess, away or corporately before she would come back to farm full time. So she hasn't made that decision. She definitely has the end goal of farming with us. I told her that I think that what we need to, or not I told her, we have discussed it as a family. And where we want to go is maybe to look at it more as a farm transition as opposed to a farm transfer. I think there's this expectation always with transfer, somebody comes in, somebody goes out. But how can we help you grow as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a farm businesswoman, into this business and still support her and set her up for future success? So I think that's how we'd like to see it. So it'll be interesting how it plays out. I think there's definitely a lot of communication that has to happen. I think goal tweaking, like there's the end goal, but then there'll be adjusting along the way as to how that happens.
Well, and I think you said it in the beginning of, we all kind of have the idea of maybe what a normal transfer or transition would look like. But really, at the end of the day, everyone's experience on each individual operation is going to be so different. But I think the importance of sharing our transfer or transition stories is to hear how it has worked in other people's businesses or how it hasn't worked and what people have learned along the way, because I think that's how this business has to work, is we have to kind of learn and grow and pivot in all of these different ways, especially with not knowing what the future of some operations will look like. I can assume that Robbie's grandfather never imagined there being robots in the barns milking cows, right? So you have to kind of learn and pivot along the way. And I think it's absolutely incredible that your daughter is looking for the future and looking to be, a business owner in agriculture, when she's ready and when you guys are ready to move in that direction. I'm interested to know from your experience in the agriculture industry as a woman and, as a business owner, what have been some of the challenges that you maybe have faced along the way in terms of being a woman in agriculture?
Well, that's a really good question. So I'd say that I think early on, I would say I felt it probably more at the beginning of my career. Now, I don't know if it's because at the time I didn't have experience also behind me, so I'm a young girl of 23 entering the industry. And, I don't come from a farming background and I've married into farming and so on and so forth. So there was definitely a level of having to prove yourself a little bit more, well, maybe quite a bit more. And like definitely having to go a lot of the extra mile to be held to the same amount of, I would say, credibility at the beginning of my career. And I would say as time went on, I was definitely in a lot of situations. I can think of, a couple of roles I had, whether it was a sales manager role or director role, just the way that it felt, because it was, or not the way that it felt, the way that demographics worked out is, there'd be 23 of us on the team and there might be like 5 or less women, just because that's the way the demographics worked. But always felt very respected in the industry. And I think that definitely I kind of have a temperament though, where like I'm just going to do something. I don't know if that makes sense. Like I don't let little things, or even if there were to be like a comment or something like that, like it's not something. I just kind of, I don't know. I just don't let some of those things hold me back. So I just kind of wanted to go and get it done and do it. But I would definitely say in the early years, there was a little bit more of having to prove myself. Something that was challenging was having children, young children, early on in the industry. Like my kids, when I say they were good and they came along for the ride, like I remember putting them in car seats at night because it was springtime and we had to load fertilizer and they needed an extra body at the plant to load a B train. And I put them in car seats and I drove them to the plant. They had to come with me and I parked the truck because they're fast asleep in the window where I'm loading the fertilizer where I can see them. And I was just so fortunate because I didn't have somebody to bobcat it in. So I thought, well, how am I going to do this? Like, how am I going to watch them in the truck, load it from the tower and bobcat it? And then, my husband called me and he said he had to park his truck and he said, well, I'm here. I'm going to park it in the yard where you work. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's perfect. Can you run the bobcat for me? So it was really, that was challenging because you didn't have that same, your male colleagues or counterparts didn't seem to have that same challenge, right?
Well, and I just think there's, as a woman in agriculture, we wear so many hats. And in this industry where you are an entrepreneur and you are running your own business, like you said, the challenges that we come up against might not be the stereotypical challenge that you think of in agriculture, right? We don't think about the younger years of your children, of where are we going to put them when we're all hands on deck, right? And, they came along for the ride.
Yeah. And I just feel that because it's a family like type business, and I even found that in the boardroom, like I always did feel very, very supported. And in all the organizations that I worked with, even my clients, like whenever I worked more in a customer interfacing role, I remember like daycare calling and saying, like we have to shut down today because the main provider's sick. And so like, you're like, well, what am I going to do? Like I've got grain samples to pick up. I've got stuff I've got to do. And so I would get on the phone and I would say, look, I said, here is my dilemma. And I don't have daycare today. And if you want me to come, I still can. I have my toddler with me. And if you don't feel that that's acceptable, I understand. That's okay. I'll reschedule. And you know what? To be honest, like most of the time, people were like, no, no, just bring them. And they would sit quietly off to the side and do their thing. They learned growing up that, mommy was on speaker call, like on speakerphone a lot. And I had meetings and they were in the back seat of the truck for a lot of it. And that's just the way it was.
And that's, I guess, a benefit of having a family business, right? Like you have the family, whatever age they are, they're along for the ride with you too. So,
Exactly. Exactly.
Kristine, what are the plans and the hopes and the big goals for the future of you and Beck Farms?
Well, I think I kind of feel like we're in this really, I don't know, this idyllic state right now. Like it's taken us years to get here, but we're just in this really nice spot. Like I don't know, maybe it's because I'm corny or cheesy, but I wake up with so much gratitude for the journey that we've had and how every little piece along the way, it feels like every little piece that we've lived has helped to prepare us for now, for what we're doing. And I just think it's so nice to see, my mother and father-in-law be able to come down to the barn. They still come to the barn every single day and they do tasks that they'd like to do. And my father-in-law loves to cut hay, and it's nice to watch him cutting hay with, my nephew comes and works with us for the summer. And, I think the future, we're excited to continue to grow in the dairy. We're excited to continue to grow on the crop base, to integrate our daughter into the business down the road. And, I know, like, I am totally aware that it is not going to be all unicorns and rainbows. Like, I've seen the movie. I just think that we're set up so that we can handle the communication and the expectations of people. And I'm really optimistic about what that's going to be like.
I love that. I love that. I want to add another question in here. For those who are listening who are young in this business and haven't quite gotten to where they hope to go, what's some advice that you have for those young women that are listening who are just starting out in their agricultural journey?
Yeah, I would say resilience. You really need to work on resilience. For me, anyways, that was key. I had to learn a lot about myself, what I needed to be resilient. I had to be kind to myself. And at the same time, you definitely have to have an edge of, so it's a balancing act because you have to have a little edge of toughness too, because it's not an easy journey. And there needs to be a sense of realism. Like I was always very pragmatic, and so is my husband, and we were very realistic. Like when we started the dairy, we looked at it and there was no way to sugarcoat it. I mean, the money just was not going to be there for us to both be home for years. And so we just said, okay, well, this is what has to be done. Are we prepared to do it or not? And that's really the question that you need to ask yourself as you're a young agricultural entrepreneur over and over. What is it that's going to have to be done? And am I prepared to do it or am I not? And then, sometimes the answer is no. We've definitely looked at opportunities and we've said, no, I'm not prepared to do that. And I'm going to choose something else. But I think that when you enter it, it allows you the possibility to be resilient because it's a path that you've 100% chosen and committed to.
Absolutely. I think that's good advice for honestly anyone at any age. So, Kristine, my last question for you is what is the most rewarding part about being a rural woman for you?
Oh, I don't even know where to start with that. Just the whole thing. I honestly, Caitlin, have to pinch myself at this stage. I'm not sure. I think there were years or times where it was easy to think that I might not get here, but I love living in my rural community. I love being able to go into town and to, see people I know and to be part of a community that I love. I love being able to look out my window and see the scenery. I'm so thankful when I head out for a run, like to be able to see the scenery and the views that I have. I'm thankful to be able to, work with my husband, who's a fantastic business partner, all at the same time. And to be able to watch this community grow and develop and just, even all the economic development around it. So I don't know, maybe it sounds again, maybe I don't want to sound cheesy or cliche, but it's really, I'm just thankful for every little piece of it.
Not cheesy at all. It's a very rewarding career and it's a very rewarding life to live. So Kristine, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I've enjoyed getting to know you more and learning more about your operation. For the folks who would like to connect with you after the show, where can they find you online?
So we have a Beck Family Farm Facebook page. And so that's probably the easiest way to find us.
Perfect. And I will link that in the show notes so people can find you and connect with you.
Great. And I just want to put the caveat out there that it doesn't look like there's a lot of traffic there now, but stay tuned. I think we're going to get that page a little bit more active as well.
Absolutely. Continue to grow in all different ways. Kristine, thank you so much again for sharing your story with us. I truly appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer, and admin support from Kim & Co. Online. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre and Carrie Munven from Blaystone Farms. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman Podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon.